I'm Sam Baker from Catholic Man UK, a husband and father by vocation, a teacher by occupation, and a student of masculinity through, well, as you'll find out, desperation. I'd like to talk to you about the specifics of Catholic masculinity, what makes a Catholic man, and what makes the Catholic vision of manhood the only authentic vision of masculinity out there. A tall order, perhaps. But manhood appears to be in a struggle in this day and age. We hear much about toxic masculinity, rape culture, the patriarchy, male loneliness and suicide. So what's going on? Manhood is an imitation game. The best way to learn to be a good man is to watch one in action. Like father, like son is firmly based in developmental psychology. Jesus says in the Gospel of John, "Truly, truly, I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees his Father doing. Because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all he does." But we live in a culture that replaces the Father with the detached male individual who carefully avoids permanent commitment to anybody and refuses to take responsibility for anyone except himself. He leads an adolescent life filled with selfish pursuits. There is a rejection of the masculine ideal of sacrificing oneself for others. When authentic manhood is absent from society, society perishes. To paraphrase St. John Paul the Great, society goes by way of the family, and the family goes by way of the father. The only remedy for masculine absence in society is masculine presence. Authentic manhood, therefore, is a state or condition of being present as an adult male, having and carrying out the associated qualities and responsibilities. Today's debate on masculinity has come about because we've lost a fixed point of reference for those qualities and responsibilities. Being a man is no longer about virtue and duty, tough physical work, commitment to marriage and a family, or sacrifices for the greater good of society. True, men exploit their masculine characteristics and strengths through violence, to abuse, rape, intimidate, rob, and murder. Good men must do their utmost to prevent this exploitation and, on behalf of all men, should ask forgiveness from our women for the uncountable occasions where this behaviour goes unchecked and unpunished. We also cannot take the blame for the families we grew up in. Anyone who had an absent father shouldn't lose hope. That loss of the father can be healed by the Father of all mercies. But this juvenile behaviour we're talking about is not manhood. This is not what authentic masculinity is. Those many individuals who do abuse their power, their strength, wealth and sexual desires aren't men. They're boys. We aren't suffering a crisis of masculinity so much as a crisis of boyhood, where more and more men in our society are crowding around the doorway of mature manhood, unable to step over the threshold. Males gravitate towards extremes, and when we allow these extremes to become our expectations for behaviour, we turn away from our real purpose. On the excessive end of those extremes, manhood is equated with brutality. But on the deficient end, we have mediocrity, being unmotivated, bland, weak. Both of these extremes are considered by one group or another to be the norm for manhood, and both result in an inability to take on real responsibility, to commit to a job or a relationship. So let me tell you something of my own story, one very much on the mediocre end of masculinity. I grew up in an odd Catholic community that bordered on a cult. As with all cults, our community attracted the vulnerable, the damaged, the broken, and those seeking some kind of security or affirmation away from the awful world out there. My own father suffered terribly from absent fathering, from a man who was a sickly, drug-dependent alcoholic and who left him sitting for hours alone outside the pub while he sat inside drinking away the housekeeping. That grandfather, in turn, was a discarded, unloved and impoverished bastard son. Given this absence of loving and responsible fatherhood, it's no wonder that my dad turned for guidance to a strong, charismatic, visionary cult leader who seemed to hold all the answers. When I arrived, as at least the third generation of this weak lineage of manhood, I was hardly prepared for a good masculine start to life. I was a boy left to his own devices, bookish, nerdy, lacking in coordination and practical skills, prone to tears, scared of getting hurt, and totally inept when it came to making solid male friendships. I had no idea how to act in the presence of other men. I sucked my thumb until hitting puberty and compulsively masturbated for years afterwards. Yet deep within me, from an early age, there was a resounding desire to be more manly. Looking back, much of my struggle was with my own insecurities and self-consciousness. I remember many awkward moments of trying to measure up to other men and the shame of appearing to fail badly. I had no manual, no guide that prepared me for these situations. And so, like Jordan Peterson's lobster, I crawled further back into my hole and awaited more humiliating defeats. There was always something elusive about being a real man that I couldn't put my finger on. It never occurred to me that the lack of strong, involved fatherhood was the root cause. So, like many in society, having lost or missed the points of reference about what it means to be a man, I spent many years trying to reinvent the masculinity wheel. I eventually discovered that the Catholic understanding of manhood held many, if not all, of the answers. And so here are my discoveries. And by the way, although I'm not explicit about this, much of it applies to men who are spiritual priestly fathers, as it does to men who are biological fathers. Firstly, Catholic manhood knows its roots, and in them, a man finds his role. With my masculinity so cut adrift, I needed to find some absolutes. Was it possible to reach back to a fixed point where we can say, this is my primordial purpose as a man? The Catechism of the Catholic Church suggests it is. It states, in creation, God laid a foundation and established laws that remain firm, on which the believer can rely with confidence, for they are the sign and pledge of the unshakable faithfulness of God's covenant. For his part, man must remain faithful to this foundation and respect the laws which the Creator has written into it. So, what firm laws did the Creator write into the foundation of manhood? Let's go back to the beginning, to Genesis. Here are the laws. God told Adam to procreate, be fruitful and fill the earth. God gave him primacy or dominion over creation. He told him to protect, to keep or guard his creatures and the creation covenant, and to provide for himself and his people, to till the land. Procreation, primacy, provision, protection. Those are the laws stitched into the fabric of manhood. And what does this still mean for men today? Scott Hahn develops this in his book, A Father Who Keeps His Promises, by stating that God's first and foundational covenant was a marriage covenant between Adam and Eve, the first couple. The fruit of their covenant love was children. It means that men are meant to be fathers of a family, biological or spiritual. Men are meant to lead that family, to provide for them and to protect them within the covenant of love established by God. By default, fatherhood also means commitment, responsibility and fidelity. Much to unpack from this, and could all be usefully summed up in another talk. Our fatherhood truly recognised within sonship, fathers as prophets, priests and kings. But for now, those are your absolutes for being a man. Manhood is not defined by occupation, but by vocation. Secondly, Catholic manhood knows its reason. Why is it that men are designed to be fathers? St. John Paul the Great tells us in his Familiaris Consortio that human fatherhood is meant to reveal and relive on earth the very fatherhood of God. What does this mean? It means that we men have the inconceivably terrifying and breathtaking task of transmitting the reality of God's paternity to others, specifically to the children in our care, so that they come to know who God the Father is through us. God has let us loose on his paternity. We are the primary manner by which others upon this earth come to know God the Father. The American author Devin Shad, who runs the excellent Fathers of St. Joseph, writes about this in his book, Show Us the Father. In summary, he says, the human father is a link between God the Father and his children. He is the voice of the Father that our children cannot hear, the face of the Father that our children cannot see, and the touch of the Father that our children cannot feel. If fathers turn their hearts to their children will turn their hearts to God. If fathers listen to their children will know the listening heart of God. If fathers show mercy to their children will discover the merciful heart of God. The human father is indeed the visible icon of the Heavenly Father. Why do we so desire a father's approval? Because we want to be approved by God the Father. Conversely, when we struggle with our belief in the presence of God, in the love of God, and in the faithfulness of God, it's because we've struggled to see presence, love, and faithfulness in our own fathers. Paul Witz, in his book, Faith of the Fatherless, The Psychology of Atheism, discovers an interesting pattern. Atheism arises in people with absent, deceased, or abusive fathers. Disappointment in one's earthly father frequently leads to a rejection of God. By contrast, prominent defenders of religious belief, and he includes Blaise Pascal, John Henry Newman, and G.K. Chesterton, were blessed with attentive, loving, and caring fathers. Look around at the world today. An increasingly fatherless world is an increasingly secular world. Look at the absence of men in church and the ease with which their children disappear from it once they hit their teens. Look at the research that shows that if the father is the primary churchgoer and living example of faith, his children have a greater likelihood of practicing the faith into adulthood than even if both father and mother regularly practice their faith. And where just the mother attends church, there is the least likelihood that the children will continue practicing their faith into adulthood. Why all this? Echoing St. John Paul the Great, Cardinal Ratzinger provides an answer. Human fatherhood gives us an anticipation of what God the Father is. But when this fatherhood does not exist, when it is experienced only as a biological phenomenon without its human and spiritual dimension, all statements about God the Father are empty. Fatherhood experienced only as a biological phenomenon. This is sex without considering the consequences. Feckless fathers leaving behind single mothers. Sperm donors turning fatherhood into a commercial transaction. Any biological act that is not followed up with the commitment and duty of fatherhood. All statements about God the Father are empty. How can we say that God the Father is good if our own father abused us? How can we say that God the Father is loving if our own father left us when we were children? Cardinal Ratzinger continues, the crisis of fatherhood we are living today is an element, perhaps the most important, threatening man in his humanity. The dissolution of fatherhood and motherhood is linked to the dissolution of our being sons and daughters. Now, as an interesting aside, one of the antonyms of dissolution is inauguration. It's a wonderful thing that true manhood helps inaugurate, invest or initiate others into the family of God. It's a very majestic term and a very stately activity. Indeed, St. Paul says, I bow my knees before the Father, from whom all paternity in heaven and on earth takes its name. Next, Catholic manhood knows its responsibilities. Let's return to St. John Paul the Great and the quote from Familiaris Consortio. Here is the line in context. In revealing and in reliving on earth the fatherhood of God, a man is called upon to ensure the harmonious and united development of all the members of the family. He will perform this task by exercising generous responsibility for the life conceived under the heart of the mother, by a more solicitous commitment to education, a task he shares with his wife, by work which is never a cause of division in the family but promotes its unity and stability, and by means of the witness he gives of an adult Christian life which effectively introduces the children into the living experience of Christ and the Church. So let's pick this apart for the next few minutes. What actual duties of mature Catholic men are described here? Firstly, he ensures the harmonious and united development of all the members of the family. A Catholic father corrects, disciplines, teaches, treats everyone justly and with fairness. He exhorts, encourages, and provides opportunities to experience new things in life. He allocates chores and duties and provides rewards and celebrations. He looks for the strengths in his children and develops them. He looks for their weaknesses and strengthens them. He establishes a family culture, family times and seasons, and helps to contain any extremes in the ebb and flow of family life. Next, he exercises generous responsibility for the life conceived under the heart of the mother. A Catholic father is present and committed. He welcomes conception. He kicks his selfish, boyish habits and gives the ensuing time and energy to his family. He settles the baby, feeds it, wipes its bum, changes its nappy. He gets down on the floor to play. He takes his children into the garden, the workshop, the countryside, the resources he has and the money he earns. He pours into their needs rather than his own. He has a solicitous commitment to education. A boy's successful transition to manhood comes about from learning how to be a man from other men, and then having his masculinity affirmed by those men. A girl will learn likewise from her mother. In practical matters, a father and a mother should teach skills and virtues necessary for the rounded education of both sons and daughters. However, it is in spiritual matters that the father has a primary responsibility to educate. St. Augustine emphasizes the father's spiritual headship of his family in his sermons on selected lessons of the New Testament. He goes so far as to compare the father's role in the home to that of bishops in the church. And he says, "Discharge our office in your own houses. A bishop is called from hence because he superintends, because he takes care and attends to others. To every man, then, if he is the head of his own house, ought the office of the episcopate to belong to take care how his household believe, that none of them fall into heresy, neither wife, nor son, nor daughter. Do not neglect, then, the least of those belonging to you. Look after the salvation of all your household with all vigilance." Or St. Paul to the Corinthians, if you like, "Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Let all that you do be done in love." Next, a man's work should never be a cause of division in the family, but promotes its unity and stability. The modern working world doesn't make it easy for us, but a Catholic father will try and find a job close to home. a career that allows flexible hours or opportunities to work from home. He will make prudent decisions about how much overtime he does, about how much travel he undertakes, about whether the extra cash from that promotion is really worth the additional hours away from the family. Men have a tendency to define and affirm their masculinity by their careers and incomes, or use their hard work to excuse their lack of presence to their families. Remember that man is not defined by occupation, but by vocation. Next, a man gives witness of an adult Christian life. An adult Christian life is a life of virtue. Did you know that the Latin word for man is via, which is at the root of the words virtue and virility? In using vir to denote a man, it also implies those qualities and properties which constitute a man. Vir is used in the Latin as a term of respect, and it often signifies, emphatically, a hero. Virtue and virility are the core foundations of becoming an authentic adult Catholic man. Virtue is about being a good man, and virility is about being good at being a man. Virtue is what makes virility noble. Virility is what makes virtue active. Aristotle's golden mean states that any virtue, let's take courage as an example, sits between two extremes, a deficient vice and an excessive vice. The deficient side of courage, for example, would be cowardice, and the excessive side, recklessness. Giving witness to an adult Christian life is a continuous, heroic determination to move away from those extremes and towards virtue, or as the Catechism of the Catholic Church defines it, a habitual and firm disposition to do the good. Virility brings us back to the four divinely appointed laws of primacy, procreation, provision and protection, and to some extent also describes our capacity in each area. The degree to which we have developed our capability in all four roles is the degree to which we might be considered virile or good at being a man. Again, this is a topic worthy of a whole other presentation. But to conclude, a man introduces the children into the living experience of Christ and the Church. This is the final point from John Paul the Great's comment on masculinity. What is the living experience of Christ and the Church? It is the unrestrained, limitless, unbidden, and unprompted gratuitous abandonment and sublimation of oneself and one's own desires for the good of another. In short, complete self-sacrifice. And how does a father introduce his children into this living experience of Christ and the Church? It's through his love of their mother. Marriage, as someone once said, is an ongoing, vivid illustration of what it costs to love an imperfect person unconditionally, just as Christ loved us. Through a selfless love of their mother, the Father shows his children how Christ loves us and his Church. As the Venerable Fulton Sheen says, suffering and responsibility, these are the hallmarks of masculinity. And it ain't easy. My own marriage has been a crucible of sorrow, and I struggled for many years expecting my wife to love me as I wanted to be loved, and resenting her when she didn't. Love became conditional. I would only repay it if I felt I was receiving it. What I didn't realize is that to love as a man like Christ is always to make the first move, to be the first to express sorrow, the first to forgive, the first to show a sign of affection, the first to break the cold wall of silence. As St. John the Evangelist writes, We love because he loved us first. St. John Chrysostom exhorts husbands, and even if it becomes necessary for you to give your life for her, yes, and even to endure and undergo suffering of any kind, do not refuse. Even though you undergo all this, you will never have done anything equal to what Christ has done. You are sacrificing yourself for someone to whom you are already joined. But he offered himself up for one who turned her back on him and hated him. He continues, in the same way then, as he honoured her by putting at his feet one who turned her back on him, who hated, rejected and disdained him, as he accomplished this not with threats or violence or terror or anything else like that, but through his untiring love, so also you should behave towards your wife. So the church was not pure. She had blemishes. She was ugly and cheap. Whatever kind of wife you marry, you will never take a bride like Christ did when he married the church. You will never marry anyone as estranged from you as the church was from Christ. Despite all this, he did not abhor or hate her for her extraordinary corruption. It's easy to wallow in resentment and self-pity in our relationships. It's easy for men, like the first Adam, to blame the woman for all the trouble and strife in their lives. But that's a boyish response. The battle between the sexes will only ever be over when we men love first. When we take our computer games, our fast cars, our banter, our addictions, our lewdness, our desire for power, and nail them firmly to the cross of self-discipline and self-denial. Then, with our arms open wide and our hearts pouring out our love, we will hear our wives and our children say, "Behold the man." Like committing to the gym after years of inactivity, committing to authentic manhood after years of juvenile indolence is a challenge. Firstly, we don't feel like we have the energy. This all sounds exhausting. Where do I start? Secondly, once you hit the gym, it's depressing how much further ahead other people appear to be and how much work you have to do to get there. But it's not until we put ourselves in a position of duress and vulnerability that we find the righteous anger and inner wherewithal to deal with and root out our apathy. But start small. St. Josemaria Escriva writes, willpower, a very important quality. Don't despise little things, for by the continual practice of denying yourself again and again in such things, which are never futile or trivial, with God's grace you will add strength and resilience to your character. In that way you will first become master of yourself, and then a guide, a chief, a leader, to compel and to urge and to inspire others with your word, your example, with your knowledge and with your power. Even if you're not yet a father, or that time seems a long way off, there is much you can do to prepare, to cast off your boyish habits and to take up your responsibilities. But know this also, to take your fitness for manhood seriously, you need to be taught how to do it correctly. You have to start light. You need a coach to guide you and to hold you accountable. You need to work on areas that are injured or weaker than others. And you will plummet to depths you never knew were there and rise to summits you never imagined. And you'll need buddies along the way to cajole and motivate you, to laugh at and with you, and who push you to achievements beyond your expectations. Manhood is a challenge, but men are built for challenges. Through my work with Catholic Man UK, I want to raise up a band of Catholic men ready to meet these challenges. Men fit and healthy in mind, body and soul. Men willing to change their lives so they can change the lives of others. If society goes by way of the family and the family goes by way of the father, then society's future is in the hands of courageous, self-sacrificing men. There are no more stirring words in this regard than a recent speech made by Jim Caviezel, the actor who portrayed Jesus in The Passion of the Christ. The world needs proud warriors animated by their faith. Warriors like St. Paul and St. Luke, and on today's feast day, St. Thomas More and St. John Fisher, who risked their names and their reputations to take their faith, their love for Jesus into the world. God is calling each one of us, each one of you, to do great things. But how often we fail to respond, dismissing it as some mental blurb. It is time for our generation now to accept that call, the call of God urging all of us to give ourselves entirely to him, to see that gentle hand guiding our path. But first we must make that commitment to start praying, to fast, to meditate on the Holy Scriptures, to take the Holy Sacrament seriously, for we are in danger of succumbing to our excesses. We must shake off this indifference, this destructive tolerance of evil that only our faith and the wisdom of Christ can save us from. But it requires warriors ready to risk their reputations, their names, even our very lives to stand for the truth. Set yourselves apart from this corrupt generation. Be saints. You weren't born to fit in, you were born to stand out. My friends, to end by paraphrasing another good American man, the age of casual manhood is over, the age of heroic manhood has begun. We can no longer be men by accident, but instead be men by conviction. Thank you.